Ebele was a bright and kind-hearted young woman, full of life and dreams, though she had experienced deep sorrow from an early age. Her mother passed away when Ebele was just a child, leaving a hole in her heart that only love could fill. Her father, Chief Okafor, a successful and wealthy businessman, loved her dearly and did everything he could to make sure she lived a life of comfort and happiness. However, life took a turn when he remarried Madame Titi, a woman who seemed warm and loving at first but was, in fact, a woman with a heart full of greed. Madame Titi's interest in Ebele was purely driven by the wealth her father possessed, and behind closed doors, she was filled with jealousy and disdain for the young girl. Unbeknownst to Ebele, her stepmother resented her presence and the love she received from Chief Okafor, while Ebele lived a life of luxury, filled with opportunities and joy. Little did she know that her stepmother harbored dark intentions. The love she thought was unconditional would soon turn into something far more sinister as Madame Titi's true nature began to reveal itself. Life changed forever for Ebele on a day she would never forget. It started like any other morning, with the sun rising over the grand mansion, where she lived with her father, stepmother, and stepsister. But by evening, everything was different. Chief Okafor, the man who had always protected and loved her, was gone. His sudden death came as a shock to everyone. But no one was more devastated than Ebele. She wept for days, unable to believe that the only parent she had left was no longer with her. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and empty. Unknown to Ebele, before his passing, her father had written a will. He had left everything he owned, his businesses, houses and wealth, to his beloved daughter. He wanted to make sure she was taken care of, no matter what happened. But Madame Titi, who had spent years pretending to care for Ebele, saw this as her chance to take everything for herself. She secretly found the will and hid it, pretending it never existed. To the outside world, she acted like a grieving widow, but inside, she was celebrating. With Chief Okafor gone and no legal document to protect Ebele, Madame Titi showed her true colours. She and her daughter, Amanda, no longer treated Ebele as part of the family. Instead, they turned her into a servant in her own home. They made her clean the floors, wash their clothes, and cook their meals while they lived in comfort. If she dared to complain, she was met with insults and threats. Ebele, once the princess of the house, was now nothing more than a maid. She had no one to turn to and nowhere to go. Ebele's life became a nightmare. From the moment she woke up to the time she went to bed, she was treated like a slave in the house that once belonged to her father. Every morning, before the sun even rose, she was forced to clean the entire mansion. She scrubbed the floors, washed the dishes, and did the laundry, while Amanda, her stepsister, lived like a queen. Amanda had servants at her beck and call, wore the finest clothes, and never lifted a finger. She spent her days shopping, attending parties, and mocking Ebele whenever she had the chance. Madame Titi made sure Ebele never returned to school. She took away her books and told her that education was no longer meant for someone like her. "You are just a maid now," she would say with a cruel smile. "Maidens don't need to study." Whenever Ebele tried to protest, she was met with harsh punishments. Sometimes she was denied food. Other times, she was locked in the storeroom overnight. The once bright and cheerful girl slowly started losing hope. Despite the suffering, Ebele never allowed bitterness to fill her heart. She remained kind and hard-working, believing that one day something would change. Whenever she felt like giving up, she thought about her father and the values he had taught her. He always told her that good things come to those who are patient, and she held on to those words like a lifeline. Even when she was exhausted, she still found the strength to be kind to the house servants who secretly pitied her. One night, while Ebele was cleaning near the staircase, she heard voices coming from Madame Titi's bedroom. She quietly moved closer and listened. Her heart pounded as she heard her stepmother laughing with Amanda. "That foolish girl has no idea," Madame Titi said. "If only she knew that her father left everything to her. But as long as I have the will hidden, she will never find out." Amanda laughed along, saying, "And now she's nothing but our little housemaid." Ebele's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Her father had left everything to her, but Madame Titi had stolen it. She wanted to burst into the room and confront them, but she knew it was useless. They would deny everything, and without proof, she had no way to fight back. That night, she lay awake in bed, tears streaming down her face. She finally understood why her life had changed so drastically. Her father had wanted her to have a bright future, but her stepmother had taken it all away. Even though she felt hopeless, something inside her refused to give up. She knew she had to find a way to escape this miserable life, but how? For now, all she could do was wait and pray for an opportunity to change her fate. Ebele's days were filled with pain, and her nights were filled with tears. No matter how hard she worked, Madame Titi and Amanda never showed her kindness. They treated her like dirt, making her feel worthless. The servants in the house pitied her, but they were too afraid to speak up. Only one person dared to help her: Mama Uju, the kind woman who lived next door. Mama Uju had been a friend of Ebele's late mother and had watched the young girl grow up. She had seen the way Madame Titi mistreated her, and it broke her heart. One evening, as Ebele was sent to fetch water from the well, Mama Uju called her over. "My child, you cannot live like this forever," she whispered, her voice filled with concern. "Your father would never have wanted this for you. You must leave this place before it destroys you." Ebele was scared. Where would she go? How would she survive? But deep inside, she knew Mama Uju was right. If she stayed, she would spend the rest of her life as a servant in her own home. That night, as the house fell silent and everyone was asleep, Ebele made her decision. She packed a small bag with the little she owned: a worn-out dress, an old pair of shoes, and a locket with her father's picture. With one last glance at the house that once held happy memories, she slipped out through the back door and disappeared into the night. The journey to the city was difficult. She had no money, no food, and no clear plan. She walked for hours until she reached the main road, where she managed to catch a ride with a kind truck driver. The city was nothing like the quiet town she had known. It was loud, busy, and full of strangers. Ebele felt lost, but she refused to give up. She wandered the streets for days, searching for work, until she finally found a small restaurant that was hiring cleaners. The owner, a tough but fair woman, agreed to give her a job. It wasn't much, but at least she had a roof over her head and food to eat. Ebele worked harder than anyone else in the restaurant. She cleaned tables, washed dishes, and swept floors without complaint. Though life was still difficult, she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in a long time. She was no longer under Madame Titi's control, and that gave her hope. One day, as she was mopping the floor, she overheard a conversation between two men sitting at a table. One of them was Mr. Jide, a well-known businessman. He was talking about how hard it was to find honest and hard-working people. Ebele didn't mean to stare, but something about his words caught her attention. Mr. Jide noticed her and smiled. "You're a hard worker," he said. "I've been watching you. You don't complain, and you do your job well." Ebele felt shy but managed to thank him. She had no idea that this small moment would change her life forever. Mr. Jide saw something special in her: determination, strength, and intelligence. He asked her about her story, and when she told him about her struggles, he was moved. "I run a company," he said. "I believe in giving people a chance. If you're willing to work hard, I can offer you a better job." Ebele could hardly believe what she was hearing. Was this the opportunity she had been waiting for? With tears in her eyes, she accepted the offer. For the first time in a long time, she felt like her life was about to change for the better. Ebele started her new job at Mr. Jide's company with determination and gratitude. At first, she was given a simple role as an office cleaner, but unlike her last job at the restaurant, she was surrounded by professionals in a real business environment. She took every opportunity to learn, paying close attention to how people worked, how they spoke, and how they handled business matters. Whenever she finished her cleaning duties, she would linger in the hallways, listening to conversations about sales, management, and investments. She was fascinated by the world of business and wished she could be a part of it. Mr. Jide was a man who believed in hard work and potential. He noticed how Ebele carried herself, how she never wasted time, and how she always went the extra mile. One day he called her into his office. "Ebele, I have been watching you," he said. "You are not just hard-working, you are smart. Tell me, do you want to do something more than cleaning?" Ebele's heart raced with excitement. "Yes, sir," she said. "I want to learn. I want to grow." Impressed by her determination, Mr. Jai decided to give her a chance. He transferred her to the office assistant role, where she helped with paperwork, organized files, and learned the basics of business operations. Ebele worked twice as hard, staying late to learn and asking questions whenever she could. She proved herself time and time again, and within months she was promoted again, this time to a junior administrative role. While Ebele was building a new life for herself, Madame Titi was busy wasting Chief Okafor's wealth. She lived as though the money would never run out, throwing lavish parties, buying expensive jewelry, and surrounding herself with people who only cared about her wealth. She believed she had won, that she had successfully taken everything from Ebele and secured a luxurious life for herself and Amanda. Amanda, spoiled by her mother's riches, became even more arrogant. She spent money without thinking, buying designer clothes, expensive handbags, and hosting extravagant vacations. She believed she was above everyone else and treated people with disrespect. Unlike Ebele, who had once been in her position and remained humble, Amanda thought wealth would last forever, but nothing lasts forever. While Madame Titi and Amanda were carelessly spending, Ebele was investing in herself. With the little money she saved from her salary, she enrolled in night school. She remembered how her father always told her that education was the key to success, and she was determined to fulfill his dream for her. Every evening after work, she attended classes, studying business, accounting, and management. It was not easy. She was often exhausted, but she never gave up. Some nights, she sat by her small desk in her tiny apartment, reading her notes under the dim light of a single bulb. She imagined her father watching over her, proud of her efforts. She reminded herself that she was not just doing this for herself, but for the legacy her father left behind. As the months passed, Ebele grew in both knowledge and confidence. She started contributing ideas in the office, surprising even the senior employees with her sharp mind. Mr. Jide, who had once given her a simple cleaning job, now saw her as someone with real potential. He trusted her with bigger responsibilities, and soon she was handling business transactions and managing clients. While Ebele was rising, Madame Titi's world was beginning to fall apart. The wealth she thought would last forever was disappearing. Bills piled up, debts increased, and the so-called friends who once surrounded her started disappearing. Amanda, used to a life of luxury, found herself in shock as the money ran low. Ebele, however, remained focused on her path. She had started from nothing, but she was now building something real. She had gone from a mistreated girl to a respected professional. And though she did not know it yet, fate was about to bring her back face to face with the past she had left behind. Life had changed completely for Ebele. From a helpless girl who was once treated like a maid, she had now become a respected professional. She worked hard every day, proving herself in Mr. Jide's company. Her intelligence, honesty, and dedication earned her not just promotions, but also the trust of powerful business figures. But while Ebele was building her future, the past she had left behind was about to resurface in the most unexpected way. One afternoon, a man arrived in town. He was old, with grey hair and sharp eyes that carried the wisdom of years. His name was Barrister Martins, a well-respected lawyer who had once worked for Chief Okafor. He had been away for a long time, travelling for legal cases. But now he had returned with an important piece of information, one that would shake everything. Barrister Martins had always suspected that something was wrong after Chief Okafor's sudden death. He knew Chief Okafor well, and he also knew the kind of man he was, a responsible father who would never leave his daughter with nothing. Before his death, Chief Okafor had called Barrister Martins to draft his final will. In that will, he had left everything, his mansion, his businesses, his bank accounts, to his only daughter, Ebele. But after his passing, the will had mysteriously disappeared, and Madame Titi had taken control of everything. What Madame Titi didn't know was that Barrister Martins had made a certified copy of the will, keeping it for legal protection. But that wasn't the only surprise. The housekeeper, a woman named Agnes, had also been hiding a secret. On the night of Chief Okafor's death, Madame Titi had called her into her bedroom. With a wicked smile, she had handed Agnes a thick envelope filled with money and whispered, "This is for you. Burn the will. Make sure it disappears forever." Agnes had taken the money, but instead of burning the will, She had hidden it. Deep down, she had always felt guilty for what Madame Titi had done to Ebele, but she had been too afraid to speak out. Now, years later, with Barrister Martins back in town, she finally found the courage to reveal the truth. She handed him the hidden will and confessed everything. The news spread like wildfire. The will had been found. The entire town was shocked. How could Madame Titi have done such a terrible thing? People who had once admired her now whispered behind her back. Soon, the matter was taken to court, and an investigation into Chief Okafor's death was reopened. During the court hearing, the evidence was laid bare for everyone to see. Barrister Martins presented the original will, along with his certified copy, proving beyond doubt that Chief Okafor had left everything to Ebele. Agnes testified, revealing how Madame Titi had bribed her to destroy the will. The court was filled with gasps as each shocking detail was exposed. But the most shocking revelation came when medical reports were brought forward. Chief Okafor's death had always seemed suspicious, and now, with the case reopened, new tests were conducted. The results were terrifying. Chief Okafor had been poisoned. Madame Titi had not just stolen Ebele's inheritance, she had taken a life to get what she wanted. As the evidence mounted, Madame Titi's once proud and confident face turned pale. Amanda, who had been sitting beside her, broke down in tears, unable to believe that her mother had gone this far. The judge, furious at such wickedness, declared Madame Titi guilty of fraud, inheritance theft, and possibly murder. The mansion, the businesses, and all the wealth were immediately stripped from her name and legally returned to Ebele. The court also ordered a deeper investigation into Chief Okafor's poisoning, and Madame Titi was taken into custody for questioning. Amanda, left in shock and disgrace, could do nothing but watch as her mother was dragged away. Meanwhile, Ebele, who had been sitting quietly through it all, felt tears fill her eyes. Justice had finally been served. The truth that had been hidden for so long had finally come to light. She had suffered for years, but now she was no longer a powerless girl. She was a woman who had risen despite all odds. As she stepped out of the courtroom, reporters rushed toward her, asking how she felt. But Ebele didn't need to say much. She simply looked up at the sky, as if speaking to her late father. "Papa, I did it," she whispered. "Your legacy is safe." Madame Titi and Amanda's world crumbled overnight. One moment, they were living in luxury, surrounded by wealth, power, and admiration. The next, they were thrown out of the mansion with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The court had ruled in Ebele's favor, stripping them of everything they had stolen. The mansion, the cars, the bank accounts. Everything was seized and rightfully returned to Ebele. Madame Titi stood outside the grand gates of the mansion that she once called home, her face filled with shock and disbelief. Amanda, her once proud and arrogant daughter, sat beside her on the pavement, tears streaming down her face. "Mama, what do we do now?" Amanda whispered, her voice shaking. But Madame Titi had no answer. The so-called friends who once surrounded them had disappeared the moment their wealth was taken away. No one wanted to be associated with them anymore. The expensive clothes, the designer handbags, the endless parties, all of it had vanished in the blink of an eye. For the first time in her life, Madame Titi felt helpless. Meanwhile, Ebele returned in grand style. She was no longer the timid girl who had been mistreated and cast aside. She had become a powerful and respected businesswoman, admired by many. As she stepped out of her luxurious car, wearing an elegant dress and carrying herself with confidence, the entire town watched in awe. She was no longer a victim. She was victorious. The mansion that had once been taken from her was now hers again. She walked through the grand halls, remembering the painful memories of being treated like a maid in her own home. But instead of feeling bitterness, she felt peace. She had won, not by seeking revenge, but by proving that goodness always triumphs over evil. One morning, as Ebele sat in the mansion's large living room, a soft knock came at the door. It was Amanda. She looked nothing like the proud, arrogant girl she once was. Her clothes were simple, her face tired and pale. "Ebele, please," Amanda whispered, her voice filled with shame. "I have nowhere to go. I need a job." Ebele studied her for a moment. Once upon a time, Amanda had laughed at her, called her worthless, and treated her like dirt. Now, Fate had reversed their roles. But instead of gloating, Ebele smiled gently. "There is a vacancy for a cleaner in one of my offices," she said. "If you are willing to work, you can have it." Amanda's eyes widened. She never imagined that one day she would be in the position of a servant, just like Ebele had been. But she had no choice. Swallowing her pride, she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Madame Titi, on the other hand, had sunk into misery. She had lost everything: her wealth, her power, and her respect. She wandered through the streets desperate and broken. One day she gathered the courage to go back to the mansion and beg for forgiveness. She fell to her knees before Ebele. "Please, my daughter," she cried. "Forgive me. I was blinded by greed. I see my mistakes now." Ebele looked at her stepmother, the woman who had made her life a living hell. She thought about all the pain, the suffering, and the years she had lost. But she also knew that holding on to hatred would only weigh her down. She took a deep breath and said, "I do not hate you, Madame Titi. But forgiveness does not erase consequences. You must face what you have done." With those words, she turned and walked away, leaving Madame Titi to deal with the reality of her actions. Justice had been served. Karma had played its part. And Ebele had reclaimed not just her father's wealth, but her dignity, her strength, and her future. Life has a way of balancing itself. No matter how long it takes, justice always finds its way. Madame Titi had built her life on lies, greed, and selfishness, believing she could take what was not hers without consequences. But in the end, she lost everything. The wealth she had stolen vanished before her eyes, and the people she once ruled over with arrogance now looked at her with pity. She had betrayed her late husband's trust, mistreated an innocent girl, and let greed consume her soul. But karma does not forget. Amanda, too, learned a painful lesson. She had followed in her mother's footsteps, looking down on others and spending money recklessly, believing life would always be easy. But when everything was taken away, she found herself lost. Forced to work as a cleaner in one of Ebele's offices, she finally understood what true struggle meant. The same girl she had once mocked was now the one giving her an opportunity. Life had humbled her in the most unexpected way. Ebele, on the other hand, proved that patience and hard work always lead to success. She had every reason to be bitter, to seek revenge, to let hatred fill her heart. But instead, she chose a different path. She focused on rebuilding her life, proving her worth, and making something of herself despite the hardships. And in the end, she didn't just reclaim her father's wealth. She earned the respect of everyone around her. The mansion was finally hers again, but it no longer felt like just a house. It was a symbol of everything she had endured and conquered. As she walked through its grand halls, she no longer saw the painful memories of the past. Instead, she saw a future filled with possibilities. She stopped in front of her father's portrait, staring into the eyes of the man who had always believed in her. "I promise to make you proud, Papa," she whispered softly, a gentle smile on her lips. The journey had been long and difficult, but she had made it. She had honored her father's legacy, not just by reclaiming his wealth, but by proving that true strength lies in kindness, patience, and resilience. And as the sun set over the mansion, it was clear. Ebele's story was not one of revenge, but of triumph.